There are moments in the history of science that should have remained unanswered, questions left untouched, and discoveries that were never meant to be made. The pursuit of knowledge, driven by human curiosity, has often led us to the edge of reason and beyond. From the depths of space to the smallest particles that make up our very existence, we have dared to look into the abyss, only to find that it gazes back with an unsettling awareness. Each of these discoveries, seemingly innocuous at first, began as an innocent inquiry into the nature of the universe, but what followed was far from ordinary. In the quiet of laboratories, through the flicker of telescope lenses, and within the sterile pages of research papers, humanity unknowingly unlocked forces that had remained dormant for eons, forces that should never have been disturbed. What if some truths were better left buried? What if, in our quest to understand, we open doors to realms where reality itself trembles? The stories you are about to read are not just about science. They are about the terror that arises when human beings peer too deeply into the unknown. These are the tales of the most controversial and unsettling scientific discoveries, discoveries that led us to question not only the universe, but our very place within it. The abyss calls, and we unknowingly stepped into its depths. The cursed discovery of black holes, the dark heart of the universe. It was a night like any other in 1915 when a German physicist, Karl Schwarzschild, made a seemingly innocent calculation that would shatter the very fabric of reality. Deep within the cold, sterile halls of a research institute, a concept was born that should have never been. A mathematical equation, a seemingly abstract idea, created a crack in the universe, a tear so profound that it would echo throughout eternity. A black hole. In his solitude, away from the chaos of war and turmoil, Schwarzschild couldn't have known that the numbers on his paper would lead to something far darker than anyone could have imagined. The notion of a black hole, a point in space where gravity becomes so intense that not even light can escape, was a pure abstraction at first. Yet even in the quiet of his own thoughts, Schwarzschild couldn't shake the dread that accompanied the idea. What could possibly exist at the heart of such a phenomenon? What unimaginable force could tear apart the very laws of nature? Years passed, and the haunting specter of Schwarzschild's equation seemed to drift away, hidden in dusty pages of scientific journals. It wasn't until decades later, in the mid-20th century, that the idea of black holes began to surface once more, revived by the eerie musings of scientists like John Archibald Wheeler and Roger Penrose. But their work was not the work of exploration or discovery. It was the work of obsession. They were driven by a dark need to understand the abyss, to peer into the heart of darkness itself. By now, black holes were no longer theoretical. They were real, confirmed by observation, and with each discovery, the terror only deepened. The universe, it seemed, was filled with regions of space where time itself unraveled, where the laws of physics no longer applied. These black holes, impossibly dense, terrifying voids, seemed to stare back at humanity with an unblinking, insatiable gaze, as if daring the world to come closer, and closer they came. In the quiet depths of the observatories, astronomers began to notice strange phenomena. Stars and galaxies seemed to behave in ways that defied all logic. There were inexplicable movements in space, objects vanishing into nothingness, stars spiraling toward invisible points of no return. They were falling into black holes, and each event was a haunting reminder of the abyss that awaited them. A cold, malevolent force was pulling at everything in its wake. But it wasn't just in the cold silence of space that this terror took root. On Earth, in laboratories filled with advanced equipment, scientists could only speculate about the true nature of black holes. The closer they came to understanding them, the more they realized that they were unlocking something much older, much more terrifying than any one person could have imagined. The more they looked, the more they began to uncover a terrifying truth. Black holes were not just a cosmic curiosity. They were gateways, gates to a dimension of pure terror. Theories began to proliferate, each one darker and more impossible than the last. Some believed black holes were entrances to other universes, parallel worlds where the laws of physics were radically different. Others speculated that they were the remnants of stars that had collapsed in on themselves, crushing entire galaxies into infinitesimally small points. And then there were whispers of black holes that were far older than the universe itself, remnants of a time before time began. These were the true horrors, the voids that lurked in the deepest corners of the cosmos, waiting for humanity to cross their threshold. The nightmare deepened when scientists began to contemplate the singularity at the heart of each black hole, a point of infinite density where space and time cease to exist. Here, in the very center of the abyss, lay the true terror. There was no escape, no way out. The singularity was a place where reality itself shattered, where even the most fundamental truths of existence were obliterated. It was the ultimate horror, a void that could swallow entire civilizations without a trace. The thought of what might be waiting there, beyond the event horizon, was enough to drive any rational mind to madness. As the decades wore on, the fear surrounding black holes only grew. The more we learned, the more we realized how little we truly understood. The discovery of supermassive black holes at the centers of galaxies was a chilling reminder that these cosmic predators were not just anomalies. They were the rulers of the universe. And as our technology advanced, we found that the universe itself seemed to be teeming with these creatures, lurking in the shadows, waiting to consume everything in their path. In the 21st century, humanity's obsession with black holes reached its peak. Telescopes capable of peering deep into the universe revealed images of these dark hearts of space, images of things that no human should ever have witnessed. The first photograph of a black hole, taken in 2019 by the Event Horizon Telescope, was an eerie, glowing ring surrounding a perfect void. It was a sight so unnatural, so alien, that it left those who viewed it with a sense of despair. There, at the center of the image, was nothing, a dark hole, an absence, a place where time and space collapsed into themselves, a place where reality had no meaning. But the terror didn't stop there. In the years since, scientists have continued to study these cosmic nightmares. They have discovered more about the singularity, about the possibility of time travel or wormholes hidden within black holes. And with every new discovery, the dread grows. What if black holes are not just windows into another universe, but doorways? What if, by unlocking their secrets, we are opening doors to forces that are beyond our comprehension? Forces that may one day come for us. There is an unsettling idea that no one dares to speak of out loud. What if humanity's fascination with black holes is not an exploration of the unknown, but a summons? A call to a darkness that has waited patiently at the edge of existence for eons, waiting for us to awaken it. And when it arrives, when the dark force behind these cosmic voids turns its attention toward Earth, there will be no escape, no place to hide, no time to run. As we peer deeper into the cosmos, as we approach the event horizon with our instruments and our minds, we must wonder, are we merely studying these black holes, or are we standing at the threshold of a nightmare we cannot undo? The more we learn, the more we cannot unlearn. The more we reach for the stars, the more we discover that the stars are watching us from their cold, empty graves, and one day, they will come for us. The discovery of DNA, the double-helix that haunted humanity. It was a quiet evening in Cambridge, 1953, when the world unknowingly crossed a line that should have never been crossed. The great and uncharted mystery of life itself one that had tantalized thinkers for centuries, was on the cusp of being unraveled. At the center of this monumental discovery were two men, James Watson and Francis Crick. Their partnership would prove to be more than just one of scientific achievement. It would become a tale of obsession, fear, and the creeping dread of knowledge that mankind was not prepared to handle. The air inside the lab was thick with anticipation as Crick hunched over the X-ray diffraction image of DNA. It had been taken by the brilliant and underappreciated Rosalind Franklin, though her name would be buried in the shadows of history. Crick's eyes scanned the photograph, his pulse quickening. "It's here. It's staring at us in the face," he whispered to Watson. But Watson, though just as eager, felt a coldness slowly seeping into his chest. There was something profoundly wrong about what they were about to uncover. Franklin's image showed a pattern, a structure. It was as if nature itself had locked away the very secret to existence in a shape so simple, so elegant, and yet so deeply disturbing. The spiral coil, the double-helix, was not just a biological structure. It was a code that contained the instructions for life itself. It was the key to all of humanity's genetic information, woven into the very strands of existence. Yet, what they didn't realize was that this discovery was the first step toward an abyss they couldn't fully comprehend. As Watson and Crick raced toward their conclusion, the atmosphere grew more suffocating, more sinister. The more they pieced together the structure of the molecule, the more they understood its implications. The power that lay within these strands of genetic material was far beyond anything humanity was prepared for. But it wasn't just about creating life. It was about controlling it, manipulating it. Soon after the paper was published, the scientific community hailed the discovery as one of the greatest breakthroughs in human history. Watson and Crick were awarded the Nobel Prize, their names etched forever in the annals of science. But as the world celebrated, something far darker began to unfold behind the scenes. Gene editing, cloning, the tampering with the very building blocks of life, they were not just hypothetical notions. They were becoming reality. And with that reality came fear. For every door that opened to the possibility of curing diseases and extending life, another door opened to horrors mankind wasn't ready to face. There were whispers, rumors that echoed in the corridors of academia. Some spoke of experiments gone awry, tinkering with the genes of animals and, worse, humans. Others spoke of terrifying visions and strange, unexplainable occurrences that seemed to follow those who dared to manipulate the genetic code. A chilling thought lingered. If one could rewrite DNA, one could create monsters. And if one could alter life, what were the boundaries? What were the limits? As the decades passed, the horrors of genetic engineering became more evident. The first test tube babies, the rise of cloning, the genetic modifications, each discovery brought with it a greater sense of unease. The scientists, once so proud of their breakthroughs, could no longer escape the dread that crept into their minds. Was humanity now playing God? Was it too late to turn back? Some of them, like the infamous Dr. Joseph Mengele during the Nazi regime, would use the knowledge of DNA to carry out heinous experiments on the human race. These experiments were grotesque, beyond comprehension, trying to perfect human genetics by cruel and inhuman means. And as the world witnessed the rise of bioengineering, the idea of designer babies took root, leading to questions about the ethics of creating a new breed of humans, ones designed not by nature, but by human hands. The true horror lay not just in the discovery, but in its misuse, in the knowledge that something so small, so invisible, could unleash an age of horror. As the decades wore on, the horror of genetic manipulation continued to echo in the halls of research labs, in the sterile silence of hospitals, and in the strange, twisted versions of humanity that were born from these experiments. What if the creatures created by altering the genetic code were not just monsters of flesh and bone, but monsters of the mind? What if they were us? What if, in our attempts to control life, we had unknowingly altered the very essence of humanity itself? The double-helix was not just a blueprint, it was a map to a darker, more terrible future, a future where humanity was no longer the masters, but the pawns in an ancient, unrelenting game. As the generations continued to experiment, the world grew colder. What had started as a quest for knowledge had morphed into a quest for power, and power, it seemed, had a price. Every discovery only led to more terrifying revelations. For the DNA we held in our hands was no longer something we merely observed. It was something we could break, reshape, and destroy. The question that haunted every scientist, every person, was this: what had we done to ourselves? And so, the story of DNA continues to unfold, its dark legacy lingering like a specter over humanity's future, a future in which no one can predict the horrors that the genetic code may yet bring forth. The cursed theory of evolution, a descent into madness. The year was 1859, and the world was on the verge of a horrifying realization that would unravel centuries of belief. It was a year that would not just redefine biology, but humanity itself. Charles Darwin, a young and ambitious naturalist, set out on an innocent voyage across the oceans aboard the HMS Beagle, unaware that his journey would lead him down a path that would forever haunt him. The voyage, to many, seemed like an academic pursuit, a simple exploration of far-off lands and undiscovered species. But for Darwin, it would be the beginning of a relentless spiral into madness. The winds of the Galapagos Islands carried with them an ominous chill, a whisper that beckoned Darwin closer to the forbidden truth of life. As he studied the unique creatures on the islands, the mockingbirds, the finches, something disturbing began to take root in his mind. There was no divine hand shaping these creatures, no guiding force creating them in a perfect image. Instead, they were changing, adapting. This unsettling thought gnawed at him relentlessly. The creatures around him were not perfect. They were flawed, and yet they survived. The very idea of survival, the notion that life itself could bend and break, change and evolve over time, began to consume him. With every observation he made, Darwin felt the weight of his growing realization. The world was not created in a single divine act. Instead, it was shaped by something far darker and more terrifying: evolution, natural selection, a brutal, unforgiving process that was driven not by beauty or divine will, but by struggle, death, and randomness. He saw it everywhere, the slow, inexorable march of change, driven by forces far beyond the control of humankind. By the time Darwin returned to England, he was a man profoundly changed. His notebook was filled with sketches and notes of creatures that seemed to taunt him with their eerie variability. He could not escape them. He began to dream of strange, half-formed creatures, beasts that bore the marks of the past yet twisted into something unrecognizable. His body began to wither as his obsession grew. He would isolate himself for hours, poring over his notes in a fevered frenzy. His once bright eyes became hollow, haunted by the terrible truth he had uncovered. And yet, he could not stop. He had seen the cracks in the fabric of existence, and they were widening before him. He saw species adapting and changing not by design, but by the cold hand of time, survival, and chance. Every species on the planet, he came to believe, was part of an endless, cyclical process of birth, death, and transformation. There was no master plan, there was no divine order, just an unrelenting drive for survival, and the consequences were terrifying. The more he thought about it, the more it drove him to the brink of madness. He began to isolate himself further, withdrawn from the world, burdened by the weight of his discovery. What he had uncovered was not just a theory. It was a nightmare, a grim reality that threatened to upend everything. He knew deep down that the moment he published his findings, he would tear apart the beliefs that had sustained human civilization for centuries. People would not understand. People would hate him for it. They would see him as a heretic, a man who dared to strip humanity of its divine creation and cast it adrift in a chaotic, brutal world of survival. When On the Origin of Species was finally published, it spread like wildfire, a spark that ignited a firestorm of controversy. At first, people were curious, intrigued by the promise of understanding the mysteries of life. But that curiosity quickly turned to fear. What Darwin had proposed was more than just an idea. It was an existential crisis. It meant that humanity was not at the pinnacle of creation. It meant we were nothing more than another link in an unbroken chain of life, subject to the same brutal forces of nature that governed all creatures. As Darwin's theory spread, it was met with the full force of the religious establishment. The Church, in particular, recoiled in horror, condemning him as a heretic. To question the notion that humanity was created in the image of God was unthinkable. The very foundation of Christian doctrine was at risk. But as the years went by, more and more scientists, unable to ignore the mounting evidence, came to accept Darwin's theory. The world was changing. What no one could predict, however, was the descent into madness that this revelation would bring. The more humanity embraced Darwin's findings, the more the shadow of existential dread grew. People were no longer able to see themselves as the pinnacle of creation. Instead, they were part of a brutal, indifferent process of survival born of chaos and death. The realization shattered the human psyche, leaving behind a fractured world where meaning seemed impossible to grasp. The horror deepened as new discoveries came to light, discoveries that revealed the terrifying power of evolution and natural selection. New species, once thought to be extinct, were revived through the process of artificial selection. Experiments were conducted, and humanity began to see itself as something that could be modified, sculpted, even designed. But these discoveries came with a terrifying cost. Scientists found themselves drawn deeper into the abyss, unable to escape the creeping dread that perhaps humanity had gone too far. And so the nightmare continued, with the shadow of Darwin's theory hanging over the world like a dark cloud. The idea that life was not perfect, but rather a never-ending chaotic process of struggle and survival, became a grim truth that would haunt future generations. And as humanity sought to understand its place in the world, one question remained. What had we become? Were we just another accident in the brutal dance of evolution, or was there something more? The answer, it seemed, was lost to time and to madness. The atomic bomb, the weapon that should never have been born. In the quiet laboratories hidden beneath the scorching desert of New Mexico, something far darker than science was being birthed. The year was 1945, and the world was teetering on the edge of an abyss that humanity could never return from. It all began with an innocent-sounding discovery, the splitting of an atom, a concept that should have remained buried in the vault of theoretical physics. But that discovery unleashed a power so terrible, so incomprehensible, that it would forever haunt those who touched it. The story of the atomic bomb begins in the early 20th century, in the quiet laboratories of Europe. Physicists like Albert Einstein and Enrico Fermi had stumbled upon a terrifying truth. Atoms could be split, releasing unimaginable amounts of energy. What had started as a theoretical curiosity soon became an insidious race between nations to harness this newfound power. Little did they know, this discovery would not just change the course of history, It would bring the world to the edge of annihilation. As the dark specter of World War II loomed, a group of scientists gathered at a remote desert base in Los Alamos, New Mexico. The project was called the Manhattan Project, but its true purpose was far more sinister. Under the guidance of J. Robert Oppenheimer, the brilliant yet tormented physicist, these men and women sought to create a weapon of unimaginable power, a weapon that could obliterate entire cities in the blink of an eye. The atomic bomb was born from their ambition, but it was also born from something darker: fear. Each night, as the scientists toiled away in their secret laboratories, strange occurrences began to plague the base. Whispers of shadows moving in the corners of rooms, unexplained gusts of wind, and odd dreams of monstrous explosions haunted the workers. It was as if the very earth beneath them was rebelling against what they were creating. But despite the ominous signs, they pressed on, driven by a sense of urgency and the looming threat of Nazi Germany. As the bomb neared completion, a sense of dread began to seep into the hearts of the scientists. They had uncovered the means to annihilate humanity itself. There was no turning back. But even Oppenheimer, who had once been so confident in the righteousness of their mission, began to feel the weight of their creation. The bomb was not just a weapon, it was a harbinger of death. The test on July 16, 1945, was meant to be a triumph. The first atomic explosion lit up the night sky with a blinding flash, turning the desert into a scene from a nightmare. The explosion was so powerful that it left a scar on the land, a scar that would never heal. But what no one could have predicted was the deep, all-consuming horror that followed. The moment the bomb exploded, Oppenheimer quoted a line from the Bhagavad Gita: "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." The explosion was only the beginning. A few weeks later, the bomb was dropped on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The devastation was catastrophic. Entire populations were wiped out, their bodies reduced to ash. The horror was not just in the immediate destruction, but in the lingering aftermath. Radiation seeped into the land, poisoning everything it touched. The survivors, their bodies disfigured and broken, were left to live in a world forever marked by the darkness that had been unleashed. As the years went by, the world was left in the grip of terror. The atomic bomb was no longer just a weapon, it was a curse. And the shadow of nuclear war continued to hang over humanity, a reminder that science, once a pursuit of knowledge, had become the harbinger of destruction. The arms race that followed ensured that the bomb was not a one-time event, but a lingering threat, a reminder of the horrors that humanity had brought into the world. In the end, the atomic bomb was not just a weapon. It was a reflection of humanity's darkest impulses. The power to destroy, to reshape the world with a single act of violence, was now in our hands. But at what cost? Could humanity ever truly escape the shadow of the atomic bomb? Could we ever live in a world where the destruction we unleashed could be undone? And so the nightmare continued, a never-ending cycle of fear and power as the world teetered on the edge of oblivion, forever haunted by the weapon that should never have been born.